Okay, well, welcome to this panel session we have now. This is, we're going to have a discussion about the UN System of National Accounts 2025 and the IMF Balance of Payments Manual version 7, so SNA 25 and BPM 7. For those of you, I'm sure most people know what this is, but for those of you who might not be familiar with these things, these are essentially Econ Stats scripture, and this scripture has been updated very recently. So my name's Rebecca Riley, and very happy here to be joined by such an august panel to discuss these issues. We have the heads of statistical agencies from the United States, Canada, the UK, and Australia. So we're going to, well, I'll introduce you. We have André Loranger from Statistics Canada, Vipin Arora from the Bureau of Economic Analysis, James Benford from the UK Office for National Statistics, and David Gruen from the Australian Bureau of Statistics. And this group here will be responsible for implementing these updates from these manuals into economic statistics. So quite a task. We put 3 broad questions to our panelists to get us going. One, what they saw as the most significant challenges in implementing SNA 25 and BPM 7. Where they felt that these updates fell short, and also how academics can support the process of implementation. So we're going to hear from each of our speakers. They're going to provide answers to these questions. We then have some time for some Q&A from the audience, and we'll conclude. Paul Schreyer will provide some comments at the end. So I think we're starting with André.
Perfect. So Paul will correct everything that we say after. Well, thank you. It's great to be here. I'm really happy to sort of sit here and talk about the SNA and balance of payments implementation with my colleagues. I'm also happy to be in Sydney. I'm from Canada. When I left on Friday morning to arrive here, it was minus 26 degrees. And today, I think we got about 10 centimeters of snow. So I was thinking about that as I was walking along the beach this morning. So we've been working toward the SNA and the BOP updates for a number of years now. And last March at the Statistical Commission, they were finally endorsed and approved. So now countries need to turn their minds to implementation. And I think it was a really long process. Many national statistics organizations, many experts were involved. Many were consulted. In the end, I think it was a heroic undertaking to update the manual. The manual, when it first started, was about this thick. Now it's this thick. I don't know how many pages there are, but like it's really expanded over the course of years. And so my remarks will touch on the practicalities of implementation. I'll touch a bit on, I think, where the standards fall short, but not from the concepts perspective. I think more from the process perspective. And I think my remarks might be somewhat biased from my own experience. As I was reflecting on the remarks here, it occurred to me that this is the 3rd update of the SNA that I'll be working on. When I started at Statistics Canada in our national accounts, I was a junior analyst, and we were implementing the SNA 93, in 97. And then it was the SNA 2008 in 2012, and now we're about to update this one. So what are the most significant challenges in implementation of the SNA 2025 and the BPM 7? I've listed a number of them there. Those are very pertinent to my own organization, but I think they also matter in other organizations. Expertise. The SNA manual, again, I just told you it was a really thick brick of concepts. It's a sequence of accounts, starting from the production accounts all the way to the balance sheet. And it's the same thing on the balance of payment side. Changes on the production account impact ultimately the entire sequence of accounts. And when you're implementing these standards, it's really important to understand how one change impacts the other. People that fully understand the full sequence of accounts and so on, I think are in limited demand, or in limited supply, I should say. In great demand, but limited supply. Greater complexity. As we think about updating the manuals, society is becoming more complex. So the measurement framework is also becoming more complex as we try to evolve and update the standard. We often think about things like data as an asset. So what do we have to do in terms of the manuals to update the whole structure of accounts, to think about that? And we think about distributional accounts. If we think about crypto assets. Yesterday, when you were asked a question about crypto assets, you said, "Man, that's hard." Because it is hard. It's really complex. Yesterday, in my question to Vipin, I talked about time series and revisions, or as we now call them, updates. But for us in Canada, time series are a big deal. I think Vipin and I talked about this yesterday. But our users, the modelers, want really long time series. And when you implement some of these concepts and new standards, sometimes it's really difficult to preserve the time series. So this is something that we're always mindful of. In 2012, when we implemented the SNA 2008, we broke a lot of series, and we got a lot of grief for it. We've gone back and fixed all those things, but so this is something that we keep top of mind all the time. Increased costs. A lot of the things that we're changing in the manuals mean that we need more data sources. We need more complex integration. And as a result, we have higher operational costs. We also have to deal with managing competing priorities. So at the same time that we're adopting the new standard in terms of the national accounts and balance of payments, there's other things going on. There's a lot of questions in Canada now about trade and tariffs and so on. It's the same people that are answering those questions that are implementing the accounts, so they're spread very thinly. There's also all kinds of other data gaps that we're addressing. I think the benefit of this discussion and the roundtable that we're having tomorrow is really to start talking about how we can implement in ways and adopt similar methods so that we maintain that international comparability. The concepts are at a very high level, but there's a lot of flexibility, I think, for countries to adopt methodology, or adopt the concept using different methodologies, and those different methodologies may lead to differences in numbers. So I think it's really important that we align on what the measurement methodologies are. And of course, we're always thinking about how do we communicate these changes to users. And I think when we think about that, we have to think about the range of users. We have very sophisticated users that understand, I suppose, the current framework quite well. So for them, it's about explaining to them what are the changes and how do they impact the data that we feed them with respect to that. But then you have to go all the way down to the man on the street who probably doesn't even know what the SNA is, who doesn't really know what the GDP is. They see it on the news, the economic growth came up, but we also have to communicate to those folks as well. So we need a nuanced sort of way of communicating with all the users. If I think about, let's see here. I do have some thoughts on a few recommendations in moving forward. I'm not going to spend too much time on that, but with respect to the challenges, I think they're multifaceted, and as a result, I think we need an approach that is also multi-pronged. We need to think about capacity building within organizations. We need to think about stakeholder engagement, international coordination and sharing of best practices, and then certainly planning. When we think about planning, I think this is where we really need to think about setting priorities and how we're actually going to sort of implement the standard. What is the most important issue in the update for a given country? How is that going to work, and so on. We've spent a lot of time thinking about that in Canada. We're not done our planning, but we're certainly very actively now planning how we're going to move through the implementation. We also need to think about a robust communication mechanism. So user-friendly documentation, stakeholder workshops, summaries of new and old metrics, and certainly impacts on the main economic variables. You know, through transition tables, this is what the number was using the old concept, this is what the number is now, this is how you got to the new concept. So all those things, we need to be super transparent about that. Sharing and communication and collaboration is really important. And there's a lot of tools that are being developed now to do that. The IMF has a compilers hub now where when you sign up and you're a compiler, you can go and have chats with similar folks in other organizations that are doing the same kind of work that you're doing. I think we need more peer-to-peer discussions. Discussions like such as these are good. They're very high level. The roundtable that we're going to have tomorrow is a little bit more precise. But I also think we need to sort of push those conversations down at the working level within the organizations so that somebody who's working on inventories in Canada can pick up the phone. I suppose I'm dating myself because I said pick up the phone. But can sort of reach out to somebody in Vipin's organization that is working on the same and to say, how are you really doing this? I think that that's really important. So where does the SNA and BPM fall short? Again, I'm not going to talk about sort of what concepts were adopted and so on. There was a long-standing research agenda, and we're working through that research agenda. What I will say, however, is that is really sort of the point about conceptual rigor in terms of the standard and the concept versus practical considerations and how you implement. As we move forward, I think we do need to put a more practical lens to the development of concepts. We need to look at, for example, the availability and the access of data to actually implement the concept. We need to think about response burden in terms of data collection for new data that we need. We need to think about the complexity and the costs of data collection and also doing the work. And also the complexity and costs in compiling the accounts in that whole integrated scenario. You know, in Canada, for example, when we think about the cultivated biological resources and so on, so forests and trees, it's not practical in Canada to actually figure out how to measure that. We're going to model it. It's not going to be, the model is not going to be any good. The forests are just too big. The approach is very different, and the situation is very different than what's happening in Australia, for example, where you have more cultivated forests. So for us, it really doesn't make too much, that concept doesn't make too much sense. So we're really going to have to think hard about how we implement that. If we think about priorities and trade-offs, again, Vipin, yesterday you said that the SNA was trying to be all things to all people. And I think we need to step back a little bit and say, well, what is the objective we're trying to reach? Is it government policy formulation? Is it financial market regulation? Is it broader economic analysis? I think we do need to think about that a little bit more as we move forward with the next standard. Data availability and data access is a super big one as well. I think there's insufficient recognition between the gap between data availability in principle and the actual access that NSOs have. So there might be tons of data out there, but can we actually get it to use to implement? Yesterday, Vipin, you were talking about your health satellite account and the costs of that data. So those are issues that we face on a day-to-day basis that impact how we implement the concept. So maybe I'll move on. So how can academics help? Well, I think academics can help in many, many ways. We talked a lot yesterday about productivity in the health sector, for example. And fundamentally, I think that's about an area where we have a lot of non-market transactions. And I think we don't tap enough into academics to sort of help us figure out what are the new methodologies that we could utilize to really sort of figure out how to measure these non-market transactions, how to put a value on them, how to find a price for them, and so on. I think we can also use academics to help design approaches to complement official measures, to make them more timely. So if you're the most detailed sort of articulation of the national accounts, the production accounts, the SUT, very detailed, very good statistical products, but they're usually 2-3 years behind the reference period. Can we use those? Can we use big data to project off those tables to produce a lot more relevant and timely numbers? Perhaps we can, and I think this is a space where academics can play a big role. Certainly identifying data gaps. On the break, we were talking about how in Canada we use consultation mechanisms to sort of talk to various stakeholders. All countries have stakeholder mechanisms to talk to folks, but this is where we can actually use the information that we get from academics and stakeholders to really push the boundaries of where we're going with the standards and actually filling some of those data gaps. And of course, providing feedback in terms of the statistics that we produce. As we drive forward with the implementation of the SNA and the BOP, our strategy in Canada is going to be to put out experimental estimates. And when we put those out, we'll try to explain again the impacts of those experimental estimates. But this is where, again, when we put those out and we say we want feedback, we actually do want feedback so that we can improve the numbers. And I think this is a place where academics can help greatly. So I'll stop here. There's probably a lot more that we can say, and hopefully you'll have a lot of questions. But in the spirit of time and so on, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, André. I think you're going to hear consistent themes through all of these. I mean, where I want to start is we probably not unsurprisingly with a little bit of history in terms of how BEA has thought about standards. And it's been kind of a on-again, off-again love affair. When you have that girlfriend you break up with and you get back together and so like maybe nobody laughs, so you haven't had that experience, but I've had it. But like, so, that's what we've had. And we had a break in the 50s, right? That's when we had 47, and then we had some in the 50s. We had the National Account Standards, the second one. And that's when BEA made a break for whatever reason. With the standards, and then we came back around. So the guy, George Yazzie, was the director then, and he had strong views about certain things. And then when Carol Carson came to the helm in the early 90s, we kind of came back in line with international standards, and that's why it took us so long to make GDP the official metric that we have in 91. So that's kind of, and so since that time, we have kind of moved in line more or less with international standards, but we do tend to, and I think this is the case with all of us in general, pick and choose the things that are most important in our national context for what we implement and what we don't. And so we've taken that approach. So that, that's a little bit of a history in terms of how we've thought about the SNAs in particular. And so I'll address these questions. I'm going to be because Andre's covered, a lot of the things that he's dealing with, all of us are dealing with. So I'm not going to kind of recover some of that. But I want to make a few general comments. And the first is the process. I've talked to my team about this a lot, and they are thrilled with the way this process has gone. The consultation, the feedback. It was a long process. It was heroic, but the people from our team that have worked on it have been very impressed with it. So I do want to just start there. And yeah, like you said, it's heroic. I mean, just imagine if you're the coordinator of this, you've got 200 countries, you got all these personnel, you got all these difficult people to deal with, and you have to get these standards out. I mean, it's pretty remarkable from my perspective. And so Yeah, I've been really impressed to see, and you know, for the SNA and the balance, the BPM manual as well. So I think, you know, the first piece of feedback that I've gotten from my team is that they just have been very happy with the process, and I feel like we're in a good spot to implement both a lot of the recommendations in both, and we'll do it similar to the way StatsCan will do it. We'll do it through experimental estimates. Data as an asset being a perfect example. You know, we've already got a research paper out on that. We'll just start working down that road. There's a couple areas where we're going to struggle, where we'll need help, and I'll come back to that here in a second. So yeah, I feel like we're well integrated to do some of that. Let me stop there with the general comment. So the process has been good. I feel like we're in a good spot for implementation in terms of both the sets of standards, but it won't be whole scale. It'll be, we'll pick and choose kind of what makes sense and where we have the resources to make some of those changes. All right, so let me jump to implementation challenges. I'm going to focus, I got 3, but I'm going to really focus on the first one, and that is, how do you sell the benefits of getting in line with international standards to policymakers? But like, that is the challenge for me, if I had to pick one, right? So here, Mr. Secretary, in your budget, you know, we can get in line with SNA. I can give you monthly business investment, or you know, or some other statistic that you might want. I mean, that's, for them, it's not a hard choice. You know, and it wouldn't be if I was in that role either. So for me, the hard part is, how do you make the case that this is really important to do? Maybe not for tomorrow, but over the long run, it's really important. And André and I were talking about it this morning, and that is, I think you're always going to struggle with this, and in some sense, you're never going to get dedicated resources to do just this. Although I think Stats New Zealand did. I was talking to somebody earlier, and I don't know if that's right, Neil? Yeah. So you might be the only ones in the world, like, you know, like, it's hard, right? And so you have to kind of eat the cost for that, and you have to find efficiencies elsewhere. So you really got to pick the things that are important to you and priorities to do it. And so I think making the case, and the one that I know that has resonated with at least, you know, my bosses has always been comparability. That's the one. You know, maintaining comparability across all our metrics has been really important. And I know I've talked to Mariana Kotsova, the head of Eurostat, and that's a big thing for her too. Is we keep the comparability across countries. So anyways, that's the biggest one. The second challenge I see, André already mentioned, that's data availability. And so, like, some of these concepts are great, but like, where are we going to get data on crypto? Like, I have no idea. We talk about it all the time, but where's that data coming from? I don't even know how to start making that data up, because sometimes you can do that, right? But so then, like, that's where you go. You know, you go to academic, this crowd, right? And you say, all right, that's where we could use some help, right? I mean, Avi and David, you guys made up some great survey stuff over there in your last session, right? So how do you find that data? Like, and there's probably 10 other things where we don't have data for here. So I think data availability is a really big deal. And then, of course, resources, which I've already mentioned. All right, where the manuals fall short. There wasn't a lot really from my team. You know, they were really they were either being really nice or in good moods that day, or you know, or what. But like, they didn't have a lot to say in terms of where they thought the manuals fell short. So I have a view here, which you heard from me yesterday, and I think I would like to see the manuals, both of them, take a broader view of data quality, because I think they're really focused on coherence, which I talked about yesterday. Right? They're really focused on being comprehensive and theoretically consistent. And I think the easy response to that is that's their goal and that's what they want to do. But like, we need to go faster. And so I need something on speed. I need something on granularity. That's what I would ask for is just a broader view of what our users are looking for too, and that's data quality. So, but that's a personal thing that's not coming from the people that actually work on this stuff, right? This is just an outsider's kind of view, not outsider, but like someone who isn't like in the day-to-day of the manuals, right? And then I've mentioned it in a few ways how academics could help. For me, it would be help us speed up, man. Help us accelerate. That's where I would go. So you see these standards. André gave a great example. 2 to 3 year delay on supply use tables. Can you come up with a method so we can do it in 6 months? Can you find a way to nowcast it so we can do it in a month? You know, like that's the kind of thing that would really help. And then we can update it over time. So I think the timeliness angle for me would be huge. Intangibles are really hard. So in particular, if we could do more research on intangibles, price indices related to all of that kind of stuff that many of you are very, very well versed in would really helpful for us. All right, so let me just then close. So I've given you a little bit on those questions, and so I want to end by talking about kind of our priorities and what we're thinking about when it comes to implementation. I think for us, number one is going to be data as an asset. Recognize data as an asset. That's something that we think is important. Crypto, you've heard me mention it many times already. Crypto will be really big for us, so we're going to be working on crypto. Extending the supply use tables and trade and value added would be a third. Something that I'd love to see, and I can't believe I'm going to say this in a public audience, is quarterly supply use tables for the United States. But that would be phenomenal. But we just, the data's not all there. So how do we get to a point where it is there? And then finally, and again, going back to something André said, I want to improve communication and the statistics. So it's at all levels, and I feel like we're really good at certain levels, and there's others where we gotta work on it. So I think communication, and I was glad that was part of this SNA update was communication. Thanks.
Great, thank you. It's great to be on this panel. This is going to be probably a little different. So I joined the ONS in August this year, and have spent most of my career before joining at central banks and finance ministries. I haven't read that big manual of SNA 25 yet, but I'm working on it. So I'm going to give you a few things I've heard from the teams on the three questions and a few first impressions, but it won't be as gospel as these two, so you have to bear with me. Starting with the challenges in terms of implementing SNA 25 and BPM 7, got four challenges here, most about the context, and we've heard a lot already, both from Vipin and André on the challenges on the data collection side, both the surveys that we might need to have and getting hold of the data that we might need to have. Also, challenges in classifying things in the right way. For us in the UK, it's layered on because we need to sort out a bunch of systems first before we can do some things. And in particular, we need to, we've got a big project program to redevelop and relaunch our business register, and we can't do the classification changes until that is done. So we have a dependency there up front, and there are similar issues on some of our survey systems that we need to sort out first. So we've got those foundations that we need to put in place first. Third area I'd bring out in terms of context is competing priorities and tight budget constraints. So and this, in some ways, is not as bad as it could be. We're flat cash for the next 3 years, but within that, we have to implement the new standards. We have to deliver a census 2031, and also a really big thing for the UK. We don't have mandatory surveys on the household side. We've got a big problem with the quality of our labour market survey, and we're throwing a lot of money at that. So there's a lot of competing priorities. There's a broader context, and I think there's different aspects to this in different countries, and we certainly have this in terms of trust and restoring trust. I think it's no accident post-pandemic that survey response rates have fallen. That's saying something about, I think, the relationship between a cohort of citizens and the state and how they feel about interacting with surveys. In the UK, we've had a number of high-profile issues with errors in the data. We've tried to do too much, and quality has suffered. So we need to restore that deficit through this period too. Overall, what do you do? What do you do when you've got lots to do and lots of contentions on on a tight resource. You've got to cut scope, and so that's what we're doing. We are narrowing the scope of statistics that we're producing, stepping back from some areas. We're looking to consolidate our outputs next year, have 10% fewer, and that's on the kind of BAU side. But we're also going through, which I think will be an annually refreshed thing, a multi-year integrated planning exercise. Obviously, the statistics is one part of that, but it's not just the statistics; it's people and technology too. All three brought together. We'll come out of that and have an updated multi-year plan by next summer. Having done this before in different places, I know that plan will be wrong because they always are, right? And I mean, stuff happens and you can't anticipate everything. So it's quite important to be like upfront about that, to have processes to update it. But one big thing for us is transparency about what we're doing, and where things are difficult, we call it working in the open, and that's a big part of restoring trust. Go to the next slide if it lets me do it. Yeah. So where does the new standards fall short? So I think I'd agree with previous speakers in terms of concepts good in lots of places, but how do you implement them? I think that's particularly so for some of the intangible asset side. Data as an asset is something that we also really want to get right, but how you actually do that is not clear cut, and there's lots of double counting that I think needs to be worked through there. I think there are I'm coming at this fresh, so excuse me if this doesn't sound right, but I think there are some areas of fuzziness in the SNA, so that well-being and sustainability and environmental accounts are kind of in there, but they're not really in there. So there's a question about what is this thing for. I think I'm with Vipin yesterday that you want to define a core module, and then you stay away from the other things and leave those to be done elsewhere. The other thing that is worth saying, and I'm going to reveal I'm on the believer side of this. AI is a big deal, right? And I think we could be in a completely different place in 5 years' time as an organisation, as an economy, and there's no way that the new standards completely anticipates that. So there's a question about how you face into that, which leads to a third area, observation, right? And I'm coming at this new. I haven't quite figured it out. One of the hardest things I've had to figure out since starting in August is the governance around the system of national accounts and the UN governance system. It's quite hard to understand, and just the structures. And one thing I was trying to find in there is the voice of the user of the statistics. I can't quite see that's in there. I think that's really important when you come back to that trust question. It's who is this for? Did we ask for this? And especially when there's kind of costs that are coming from implementing the things, so maybe something to think about there. And then is it agile enough, particularly when we're going through a big period of change? I'll put up a quick slide here. OECD survey, different countries of where people say they will implement the standards, clustering from 2029, 2030. The stars are where different countries have said that it's going to be core first, and then a tail afterwards. Begs the question. So what is core? Is one thing that I think left to be worked through. Another thing, and both André and Vipin touched on this too, is we don't really want to leave it all to be done in 2030, right? So using experimental estimates first, and I think you can do that more easily where it's model based and you don't have data requirements to work through. And I think that's quite a good area for international collaboration too. So we can learn from each other. Relatively fresh from a conference a couple of weeks ago at the fund on asymmetries and the treatment of multinationals. That seems to be quite a lot of work in progress there. I'm not that convinced we've got the right kind of processes and fora to make sure we have got consistent treatment. But that's going to be a really big thing in the years to come too. How can academics help? I think it kind of varies at different points in time. At this point in time, there's quite a lot on NSOs. It would be my NSIs, depending on how you want to call it, my observation. And so it's a great time for academia to lean in. I think there's some important fundamental questions to how do you want the system to work. So like, what is the core set of statistics that you really want the NSI to focus on? Because there are real trade-offs. You do too much, you will compromise on quality somewhere, and you can't really do that. So what is most important for the NSI to do? What are they uniquely placed to do, and what modules can be left for elsewhere? And what do you need in terms of data sharing across the system to make that work? So quite important questions there. I mean, to return to something I said on the previous slide, I think AI is really going to matter, both for how the statistics work, but also for how statistics institutes work. And that's right, and that change is coming in the next 5 years. Better get ahead of it. So, would be a great place for academia to lean in. And yeah, I think, and just a hat tip to Rebecca. I think ESCoE is a great model, and we've got a really good partnership with ESCoE at the ONS. And yeah, it's something that is really helpful, actually, particularly when bandwidth is constrained, to be able to chuck some really difficult questions to Rebecca. And so, can you help me out on this one? So yeah, hopefully something that's useful for others to take inspiration from too. Thank you.
I've also got some slides, which will be coming up shortly. Thanks a lot. So I thought I would take the opportunity initially just to thank the scientific committee that put this together. So that's Kevin Fox, Rebecca Riley, Erwin Dewart, and Michael Smeads. I think this is the second one of these conferences. We had one last year in December, and I do think popularising the importance of economic measurement for a wider audience is something that I think is very worthwhile, and so I'm extremely grateful to the people who put this together and have seen it happen both last year and this year, and I would be very keen for it to continue. Obviously, thank the organisers who've done the spade work to get it to happen, and I would be remiss if I didn't reflect on the fact that I'm usually the shoe is usually on the other foot. I'm usually somewhere in Northern Europe or North America, and about this time of the day, I'm thinking, am I going to be able to stay awake for the whole of this session? So I just want to thank all of my fellow panellists who have come from either somewhere near Ottawa, Washington, DC, Paris, London, and I know what it feels like, and I'm grateful to you for coming. And we've had a very good representation from all over the place, and just very grateful. Now, I know Sydney's not a bad draw card, I get that, but I'm still very grateful for everyone for coming. So thank you very much. And and flying across a bunch of time zones, it ain't much fun. Okay, so to the topic at hand. Have you got the clicker? Yeah, thanks. I don't know where you point, but I'm about to find out. You don't point there? How about there? Is it the middle one? Oh, that one. I'm pushing the wrong button. That doesn't help. Okay, so I'm going to try and say this is a slide about challenges in implementing SNA BPM, and I must say there are an awful lot of things on this slide, and I don't want to give the impression that it's all overwhelming. We've got a fair bit of time to do this. We're not doing it on Vipin's timetable by the end of next week. We're going to take some time over this. In Australia's case, the very first we were either the first or very early countries to implement SNA 2008, and that was courageous, and it didn't work out all that well. So we're not going to be, as James's slide showed, we're not going to be early adopters of this. We're probably going to tend to be later. And there's a series of reasons for that. One of them is the fact that we were first, and we don't want to do that again. But also, there's a whole lot of other things that other speakers have have highlighted, that there's a lot of other things going on, and we're sequencing those things. We've got a substantial modernisation agenda. It's interesting to reflect on the differences between countries. In our case, we will go to government next year with a detailed business case to fund this work, and that's the standard in Australia. Your appropriation doesn't cover things like this, and so you have to make the case along with other entities across the government to fund this. And in our case, it's going to be SNA 25, BPM 7, and an updated industrial classification, which is actually huge and very expensive. There's no one here from the government, so I'm not actually pitching to them, but I will be. So the other thing is going out to users and finding out what they care about. And of course, it sort of reflects on what other people have said. They're not necessarily so enamoured with the idea of you updating the system of national accounts. They've got specific things they want. And in our case, household distributional tables and digital supply use tables are the things that they say, well, you know, if you're going to be doing this stuff, how about you do that? So there will be a conversation. We will have to think about sequencing both from our own point of view, doing the core stuff, but also from the point of view of users. I was struck by the comment that Vipin made. How do you sell the benefit of international comparison to policymakers? And that's got a very different flavour whether you're in a big country or a little country. We're in New Zealand's camp on this one, in the sense that resonates. Policymakers don't want Australia's GDP not to be the same as everybody else's. They are willing to fund something that keeps us internationally comparable. I absolutely get the US position. It's very different. I get that. So that's kind of interesting. For Australia, there are a bunch of things that are going to be particularly relevant to us. For instance, non-renewable resources, depletion and discovery. Just a little statistic. At the moment, we export 200 million tonnes of iron ore a day. That's a big number. But if you look across all the things, all of our non-renewable resources, we're finding it faster than we're depleting it. That's probably not true of iron ore, but we've got 800 years of supply. So we don't have to worry about that one. Certainly not me. So anyway, but that's a kind of an interesting angle that, so depletion matters, but we keep finding rare earths, right? So that's an interesting angle from our point of view, and it's going to matter to try and get that stuff right. So in terms of timing, it's going to be very much. We've got systems to rebuild before we can do too much of this implementation. The other thing which has been spoken about a little bit is that our experience, and I suspect it's common, is that the people who work on this stuff, if you go back to when we did SNA 08, lots of people had 10 years experience in national accounts. Now it's more like 2 or 3. So the people who work, there's more movement within organisations, and it's less of a career than it was 15 years ago. And so in terms of the number of people who've got the expertise, that's going to be an issue. Okay. Challenges. Much of these other things we've already talked about, and I don't have anything particular to contribute. Although I will make the point about artificial intelligence. I totally agree with James. As I understand it, the guidance was developed in 2021, the current guidance. So that's before ChatGPT. And I mean, I don't envy the task of the people who are going to update this thing. And I also think, just to be frank, it's tough to ask academics to work on this because you put 9 months of work into it, and then some smart aleck comes out with a new one of these things, and it totally changes the framework. So I actually think AI is particularly difficult because the incentives to work on it are, but why would I work on that? It'll be different in 15 months. So I think that's a tricky one. Okay. I also, I just wanted to highlight another comment that James made about the importance of the user focus. And several of us, including the UK, have been working in the UNSC to set up an intersecretariat working group, having member countries bring the user's perspective to bear. So that's quite important. My next slides are smaller and they don't work. I know, that's all right. Okay, so I think I've talked a little bit about this. Again, economic development updates the standards, and AI being the most serious example of that. Attempts to serve a too broad a purpose versus not going far enough. It's sort of a question of what exactly is. This is not SEA, the System of Environmental and Economic Accounts. It's the SNA. So exactly how do you, where do you draw that line? And I've talked about I've talked about the limited user-centric design. And then finally, what can academics do? Well, academics can be extremely useful in this area. After all, a fair bit of the society's resources go into developing, into measuring these things, and I think it's not that fashionable for academics to work on economic measurement. But I do think that, especially in a world where this is getting so much more complicated, where the economy has a very irritating habit of growing in the areas that we can't measure, there are lots of important, interesting questions that national statistical officers have to grapple with, and to the extent that we can get help training people in the skills that we're going to need, grappling with these common intellectual problems with us, all of that's going to be helpful, and becoming advocates for new standards, supporting methodological innovation, all of that stuff. Thank you.
Thank you very much for all of those very interesting perspectives. This is the point where the audience gets to ask questions from the panelists. So please put your hand forward if you have any questions. We have about 30 or 40 minutes for this. While you're thinking about your questions, I'll just draw together some common themes. So on the challenges question, I think everybody's talking about resource problems, human capital issues. The data required isn't there, or the lack of it, the lack of access to the data. And everyone's also highlighted in one way or another the communication challenges and the important need of international coordination on various fronts. And on the falling short question, different views about this, but user relevance came up in various guises. Prioritization, how do we prioritize this task? Feasibility. I think also there's different views about the way in which the SNA has been, or the process for updating the SNA, whether it works well, whether it doesn't work well. And then on academics helping, well, I think there was I'm not going to say cry for help, but certainly a request for academics to lean in, so that's good. And also to lean in such a way that the research is actually useful. So this is this point about having, collaborating for the academics to collaborate with the statistical agencies to make the research relevant. On specific, there's specific areas where academics might add more value than others. There's some tricky ones that have been highlighted and where academics have already made progress on intangibles, non-market transactions, but also issues arising with, subnational or supranational statistics, or the problems that are created by complex production structures. Also raised several times, academics are very good at developing new modeling techniques or new econometric techniques. So that's another area we can lean in. And also in identifying where there still are conceptual issues. So that was a very quick summary of some of the, there's lots of other things that were said, but I think those were some of the main points. So we have some microphones. So I'd like to take a few questions at a time. We can start over here.
Hi, thanks. I think because everyone, the last section, what you guys talk about is how academic can help. So my question is really about for doing some methodology and modeling work, what about in certain topics, academia, they not really agree with each other. And they sometimes might also have opposite opinions. So this is some question also I supposed to ask when doing yesterday's BA presentation, because when you mentioned what BA doing the arts and cultural satellite accounts, basically one of the theory from the academia you guys use is a concentric circles model produced by Professor David Strausby. But the most people who disagree with this theory actually is from academia themselves. So when you having that kind of issues, how different countries, statistical organizations handling with this kind of issues, that's my question.
Before we come to that, is there, Roland?
Yeah, thanks for a really interesting overview, really relevant questions and issues. My question picks up on a few things which were said by various people. André made the point around user engagement and communication near the end. And I think you were the only one who actually spoke about engagement with the men in the street, citizens. Now, one of my hobby horses in these discussions is that as official statisticians, I think we have a bit of an issue in terms of having a bit of an addiction to averages, right? And this is something that David also mentioned this morning in terms of, okay, you can have an average, but you also have to look at the distribution. And like I always have to think back about one of my first professors in social statistics. He actually opened his first class with the line, "The average is the worst statistical measure ever invented." So, I mean, obviously averages are important. I'm not denying that they're not important. But I think going back to the whole issue around engagement with citizens, I think it's up to us to actually become much more vocal about publishing, disseminating, communicating about distributions rather than averages. Because that's where you will also get the trust from citizens when they can tell this number, this average. If you say GDP goes up and the economy is doing well for the country, that doesn't mean anything to a single mom with 2 kids without a job, because like she won't experience it like that. And so I think that it's incumbent on us as a community, I think, to actually do some work and some thinking here around, if we're going to be serious about citizen engagement, how do we actually produce, communicate, and engage with citizens who may have different experiences than the experience of the average? So I'm just interested on your views on that issue.
We'll take a third question here, and then we'll go to the panel.
Kia ora, Jason Adiwell, Stats NZ. Thank you all for your thoughts and your contributions there. It all sort of resonated and very consistent with what we've been thinking about. And one thing I just wanted to touch on was the question of international comparability, and that is, as David said, we've got funding, or we've at least got government to agree to give us money to do this work, and that was essentially our entire argument was around, it needs to be, the reason you're going to invest in this is for international comparability. We don't want to get left behind. And we did get left behind last time when the Australians went 5 years before us, and we were fielding all sorts of questions. Why is the per capita GDP of Tasmania all of a sudden bigger than New Zealand's? And it was simply because of that. But I guess we've also got a great opportunity here. And the other way we sold it as well is in terms of international comparability, in particular with our major trading partners. So all you guys, so you may not know this, Vipin, but US is now the second biggest export destination for New Zealand. We don't even break your top 50 for imports, but we still got stung with tariffs. But I guess that the key thing is that it worries me when I start to hear that you know, that you're resource constrained and you're going to pick and choose which ones you do, because that undermines the whole thing. And the opportunity we do have here is this time around, we all signed up to implementing by 2030. Now, I didn't think that happened in the past. So, you know, we've got to take that opportunity and work together and make sure we develop this stuff, and we're all having the same data challenges. So how do we work together to kind of overcome them? And yeah, probably run out of things to say, but it was just really focusing on that international comparability, not losing sight of it. And maybe just a little plug as well, like you're all rich NSOs sitting up here. Even though you're resource constraints, we've also got to think about our other colleagues around the world, and for Australia and New Zealand, it's our Pacific countries in particular. Make sure this stuff doesn't get too complex that they can't do it at all.
Okay, so we've got three questions. Perhaps we should work backwards and maybe just address this point about international comparability and the importance of making the resource available to hit these targets in 2030. I don't know, David, do you want to start on that?
So I don't think we're going to make 2030, but we're going to try and be as close as we can. I wasn't aware that we did 08 5 years before you guys did, but I'm certainly hoping that the gap between us and you is a lot less than that this time. But I completely agree, and I also I agree with you that it's one of the arguments that resonates with the community, or well, maybe with the policymakers and to some extent the community, that the data is comparable. So I think that you just want me to talk about that one, don't you? Or yeah, fine.
Okay.
Can say a bit. So I touched on this in the presentation. I think there's two aspects. There's one is what is core by 2030, and I mean that's still to be worked through. And understand the European Union's got an emerging position on that, but it could be a broader discussion. Should be a broader discussion. I mean, for me, at first pass, the GDP moving parts. I mean, that those seem to be the more important parts to maintain comparability. And then on like the road to 2030, I think you can. We've started to do this internally. You can divide up the blocks into those which have dependencies, systems dependencies, and those which don't. And the ones which don't, there's more scope to kind of look at experimental estimates there early. Data as an asset is an example. It's more model based in some places. So figuring out how we can work together to find those parts early, I think is a good way to look.
Yes, and I mean the roundtable tomorrow is certainly a forum for being able to engage. Let's turn to Roland's question about user engagement. I think, there's been lots of talk about core statistics. Who decides what core? Well, you had a definition yesterday, but who decides what core statistics are, and for who are they being constructed? Did anybody want to pick up on that?
So I don't know that I want to pronounce on what core statistics are. I think if you talk to the folks in the Intersecretariat Working Group on National Accounts, the IMF folks and stuff, they'll say that the core accounts are the sequence of accounts, and everything outside of that main sequence is non-core. I suppose there's a certain practicality to that, but nevertheless, I think we need to sort of go a little bit deeper and say, well, what does core mean for us in each of our countries? And I think that's where you're coming from, Vipin. But on user engagement and producing data for everyone, a few years ago in Canada, and I'm going to switch gears totally here, it's not about the SNA anymore, but we were funded to start disaggregating all of our data sets, particularly on the social side, whereabout we would give more detail on diversity groups, racialized populations, and so on. Because why? Because, as you said, the single mother with the two children experiences GDP growth very differently. So we're trying to address that by producing all kinds of statistics that show those disaggregations. We've been producing distributed national accounts, or distributions of national accounts for a long time, and we're going to continue to do that. So we're already on that standard. But I think it's really, really important. And the other bit, I think, is that every time I speak to any users, every time I go anywhere in Canada, somebody congratulates me on what we're doing on social media. And sometimes they're really creative posts that maybe reference GDP, maybe not. But they do it in a really creative way that creates a buzz about the statistics. It doesn't go into the detail about the concepts. It doesn't go into the detail about the measurement. But it certainly highlights something that's unique about a particular data set in ways that the regular people can relate to. And I think that's really important too, and there's a lot to be learned from those approaches, including the SNA update.
I just wanted to follow up regarding Roland's remark on distributions. Actually, it comes back to the sort of fuzziness that James mentioned regarding this title, well-being. In practice, when this chapter on well-being comes up, actually what we're looking at are three things probably. One is the introduction of distributional national accounts. So, I mean, Canada has done this already. Some countries have started, but as of in the future, you know, most countries will have a breakdown of the household accounts into by socioeconomic criterion. Which is, of course, something that will speak to people more directly than GDP, which is a sort of a big aggregate that doesn't relate to everyday experience. The second thing is there will be, even though it's outside GDP, a harmonized way of getting at household non-market activity, which is, you know, a big topic in society. There are big gender issues involved, and the ambition of the updated SNA is to bring some international comparability also in this. And the third element that is associated with this is one of communications, okay? I mean, there's this constant call also to not only communicate on GDP, but on all the other elements that are in the accounts that are available and that relate more closely to people's everyday experience.
I just wanted to back up the comment that André made about social media. We also have a active social media presence, and partly I think of it as attempting to appeal to a demographic that I suspect would have the ABS a fair way down their list of websites that they would visit, like maybe at the bottom, or even further even lower than that. And so to interest groups that basically get their information via social media, and to kind of give them a sense that some of this stuff is pretty cool and it's interesting, and if it can be presented in a way that is compelling, I think you can generate quite a lot of interest. And I also get people, well, not quite stopping me in the streets, that's overstating it, but nevertheless, people just saying, you know, your social media account is brilliant and keep it up and all this sort of stuff. So I'll have to follow yours as well. Yeah, I think it's from my point of view, it was an imaginative way to try and engage with a group that is pretty disengaged with the standard things that we produce.
Okay, so let's just move on then to the third question, which I interpreted as what do you do when there are different methods of doing the same thing? How do you agree on which one to use? And I have to say, working with academics on these types of issues for the last several years, you know, there clearly are many, many different ways of doing things and very firmly held beliefs about what's right and what's wrong. So it's not easy to choose between these methodologies, but nonetheless, there are several examples of where those conflicts have been resolved and a single sort of best way forward has been identified. But anyway, important question. Does anybody want to address that one?
I was just going to encourage academics to keep at it. You're not going to, and whether it's official statistics or whether it's other things that governments produce, you're not always going to convince the official entities of the brilliance of your insight. But to the extent that you start a conversation, get other people to agree with you, I mean, that's how scientific progress proceeds, right? You put forward something, and then other people look at it, and sort of there's either formal or informal peer review process, and sometimes those things fly and sometimes they don't. That's the nature of progress.
Maybe I'll just give a concrete example. In the past and currently, we work really closely with Vipin's group at the BEA. In past revisions, for example, when we capitalize software, we were having constant discussions with the folks at the BEA. And we debated methodologies. We're thinking of doing this. They're thinking of doing this. And in the end, we agreed to use the same methodology for comparable purposes. Had we not had those discussions and really debated, we probably would have went separate ways, and then we would have had numbers that don't align. So I think this is part of that exercise and sort of what we need to do moving forward. And we will have, I think, important debates on how to implement and how to derive the methodologies to implement the concepts. But that's what we need to do, I think.
Okay, so I'd like to take some more questions from the audience. Erwin.
Yeah, I'm an academic that's worked on measurement problems for some years. And so I'm just interested in how academics could, work more effectively with statistical agencies. And I just want to say that having access to the data is very important. Okay, so here's my good buddy. He can get Japanese data on almost anything. And as a result, I've totally changed my view about index number theory. Index number theory at higher levels of aggregation is way different from the elementary level. And I wouldn't know that without actually working on the data. Now, this creates problems for statistical agencies because they can't share their data by laws in some cases. So, but that's where you learn. When you're actually faced with the same problems and the same data that statistical agencies have and then try to solve those problems, that's when you can really be effective. I don't know how to solve this problem.
Do we have any other questions?
I just want to put in a plug for the ABS social media team. They're a marvel. I'm not sure if I'm the demographic they're aiming for, but sure. But thank you, David. Puns about pie. I mean, that's just brilliant stuff. That I can watch the social media feed all day long. So about engagement with academics, and I've done a bit of engagement with national statistical officers over the years, and the experiences vary, and they're not always consistent. Part of that depends on the people involved at the time. Sometimes it's about the nature of the problem or the ability to access the data you need. Well, I think that the best engagements happen when you can work out some alignment of those issues. But fundamentally, there has to be an understanding on the side of the National Statistical Office about what motivates academics. Our job is not to provide a public service to the government, the National Statistical Office, do things for free. One country asked me once, how do we get our academics involved in solving the problems we have? And I said, well, academics need money and data. And oh no, we can't give that. I said, well, what do? Well, we call them up and tell them what we need. And then we've given them the idea, what's their problem? Why don't they just get to it and solve our problem? So really, academics, they need money, they need data, and they need to be able to publish. Publish or perish. That's the nature of the business. And so if we're told that, we'll give you the data and we'll support you, but this has to be kept under the table. This is quiet. But, you say, well, that's then a consultancy. And then you say, well, we don't have the money to pay you as a consultant. That's the sort of problems you get into. So there has to be an alignment between what academics need to advance their career, and what the national statistical officers need to improve their statistics. If that's aligned, it can work very effectively.
Great. Do we have a third question? Okay, not. You can think about some more while we deal with these ones. I mean, on Kevin's point, let's address that first. And I mean, I think one observation is that it's easier for academics to make an impact in the statistical agency if the statistical agency has some absorptive capacity, so sort of engages in research itself as well. Interested to hear different approaches to that as well, and to response to Kevin's question. I don't know who wants to start on that.
This is the reason I'm such a big fan of the ESCoE model. I think it helps to bridge kind of the divide. In fact, you know, I heard, is it true that you teach a class in economic measurement? Yeah, I mean, that's what I was going to say. I would love, I mean, I can't believe we don't have one in the United States. I mean, that's the kind of thing I think we need to do more of. A lot of David's points around that, you know, like making it kind of sexy to study economics. That's a weird statement right there, but making it, to study, how good would that be? But like that's really cool. I mean, I think one of your students was telling me that yesterday. That's good for you, man. But we just need more of that, and I think we've been thinking about that at the U.S. Census Bureau, BEA. How can we do more of those types of things? And I think it goes right to your point. You got to get the double coincidence of wants, right? You have to get everything lined up. And I think ESCoE helps to solve that problem, and that's why I like the model so much.
I was just going to say, to the extent that I have anything to do with it, my attitude is to try and give data to academics if I can. If it's illegal, that's going to get harder. But often it's the will rather than. So just an anecdote. We have a data sharing scheme in Australia, and I was involved with the people who were designing it, and they were looking at what the barriers were to data sharing. And there are legal barriers, but what they kept coming back to was that it was largely culture. It was largely the fact that the incentives for people who were going to share data out of government were misaligned. What do I mean by that? If you share data with some academic and the academic then does something very clever with it, the academic gets the kudos, but if the thing that they've done embarrasses the government, someone comes back to you and says, why did you give them that data? So my attitude, I mean, one of the benefits of being independent as an agency is that I can champion the idea of trying to help academics get access because it has a longer term benefit, and that's certainly something I'm very keen to do. But yeah, you've got to work at it.
Yeah, just to add to the point on open data, so I think it's really important, really fundamental, and you know, if all the data stays locked in the National Statistics Institute, then you won't get the value out of it, and the NSO will also probably be overworked as well, because there's many hands outside who could be getting that value. We do have a system in the UK called a Secure Research Service, which is one route to making those data products available. I mean, so I take the point on incentives, and I think that there is a point there, but I also think it's really important to be quite focused and prioritized on data sharing, because there's a lot of stuff that you have to set up that costs money, and also unless you're sufficiently clear about to what end, like what are you building this data asset for, sometimes that can get in the way of sharing too. And I've seen, in fact, in the UK's experience, it's gone wrong if you just say we just need to share all the data. Right? You need to kind of like focus on where the most important gaps are. And so I mean that is an area that I think is work in progress, but to just define where our biggest data gaps, that assets that could be put together at a granular level. The other one, which I've seen done in other fields, and I may just have missed it, but synthetic data could be a route out of some of the data sharing problems in terms of not having the legal ability to share it, and maybe that's something that can be explored more too.
Yeah, data access is a super big issue that we constantly deal with. In Canada, we have the Canadian Research Data Network that we partner with the university networks to get data into universities. We've made, I think, great strides over the last few years in getting more business data in sort of in the CRDCN. In the past, it was mainly the social statistics, the census type files. And I think adding the business data brings a different dynamic to that. So we're actively working on that. I think we also need to get creative in terms of how we work with academics. Kind of been toying in the back of my head, and I haven't told anybody sort of this at home yet, but we should sort of be thinking about, fellowships with academics where they could come in and do some work and have access to data while sort of they're yeah, I know, and that's kind of where those ideas are inspired. I think that's a great model to provide data access, so I'm certainly thinking about that. And I just thought I'd make a plug for something that I saw coming last couple of weeks from the NBER in the U.S. So they've set up now a National Bureau of Economic Research is setting up a collaboration with Catherine Abraham, who I think used to chair your your National Accounts Advisory Committee way back when. And they're creating an Economic Measurement Research Institute. And I saw the call out not too long ago, and it was asking for proposals on measurement in prices, output, labor outcomes, and so on, technology, and a lot of related concepts. So I think those kind of ideas are really a good way to sort of facilitate that collaboration between the academics and the NSOs.
Okay, so I'm going to hand over to Paul Schreyer in a minute, but just one thing I think that we haven't discussed. So your colleagues think that the SNA updating process was very good, and you said maybe they were in a good mood that day when they said that. I know there are other views about both the frequency with which it's updated and there's trade-offs there, updating and reflecting modern economy versus the cost of going through this process on a regular basis. There's also a question about how, and people did touch on this, on how users feed into this process. How, for example, if academics do carry out research on these topics, how does it actually make its way into the SNA updates? I think there's a bit of a disconnect there sometimes. So I wonder whether you have any views on that.
Yeah, I have a lot of views on that. I'll save some airtime for my colleagues. I think, and David, you've already alluded to that. The management of the manuals and so the compilation of new manuals is something that is in the purview of the international statistics organizations, the UN, the IMF, the OECD. There are processes to network with experts that come from countries. Although I think many of us at the last Statistical Commission on this particular issue felt that the comments from the countries weren't perhaps addressed adequately, or were listened, but in the end, conceptual purity won out over practical implementation. And I think that comment was heard, and now there's a review happening about sort of and you mentioned that work that's happening with the UN now. So I think there are ways, and I think as we move forward on that process, I think there are ways to bring in academic views into that discussion, either through the expert group or the advisory expert group that reports to this committee. But one thing I do know is that if we look at how quickly the standards get updated, so the SNA 93 to the SNA 2008, 15 years, the SNA 2025, 17 years after. We can't afford to wait another 20 years. Society's moving too quickly. If we don't update the standards faster, I think we're soon going to be irrelevant. So there is work happening in those inside the statistical ecosystem to look at some of that. I was a former chair of the UNSW-ESCoE committee, so I was purview to this task team that I'm going to talk about, because the UNSW-ESCoE is responsible for the SIA standard. It's not the international bodies that are responsible for that, so it's a strange artifact, I suppose, in the UN structure. But this task team is being led by the IMF, and what they're trying to do, because this time we did the SNA and the balance of payments together, harmonized a lot of things, and there was a lot of benefit in that. So now we're looking at, can we harmonize the SNA, the balance of payments, but also the SIA, the GIS, and all the manuals together. And if we think about that, we can look at a research agenda for all of those things together. That obviously we'd consult with academics, but more importantly, I think if we can find issues that are cross-cutting across all the standards, perhaps we don't need to update the SNA as a big volume in its entirety, but we can focus on specific issues across all the standards at the same time. So if there's a particular issue that's becoming super urgent, something related to AI, let's say, that we do need some guidance on, and we do need to change concepts, well, let's change the concepts for just that issue, implement them across the world, across all the various standards, and do so sort of at in a timely fashion, maybe every 2-3 years or every 5 years, rather than wait 20 years for the next one. So this is some thinking that's happening right now.
Paul, do you want to conclude the session with your comments?
Well, I mean, I'm trying to comment a few things and summarize a little bit what I heard as well. I think one message that comes through quite clearly is that well, I haven't heard anyone actually challenging the update as such, that this was not a useful thing, or keeping the SNA up to date. Really, most of the challenges, or nearly all of them, come through in terms of the practicalities of implementation. I think that is a fair takeaway from that concern, from that area of insufficient data sources, financial constraints, human resources, and we've heard that. I would like to bring in sort of two views that did come up in terms of criticism or discussion around the SNA update in a more substantive way. There was, how shall I characterize this, a group of voices that found that the update went too far. Okay, so too much. There was an attempt to put too many new aspects into, what should actually be kept as a, core economic statistics, and leave the other things to other parts of the statistical system. There was also, that is closely linked to the nervousness, should I say, of practitioners in terms of imputations. Okay, many of the new topics require that we impute things. Well, I mean, this is a reflection of the complexities of our economies and social and societies out there, where things, you can't observe them anymore very often, or these are concepts where you need to do imputations. But still, for the statisticians, that is often a problem, and there is a fear then of international comparability, because different countries impute differently. So there's this, I mean, a good case in point is the debate about imputing a cost of capital term to government production. And actually, here's a case where academics have for, I don't know how many decades, Irvin, so you can go back a long way and look at the academic literature that has long said this should be done. And, it took its time, but it's here now. So a clear positive signal coming out of that. But it's a good example. It's also a good example for seeking cooperation and coordination about how to do this. Yeah, because this can be done, and it will help relevance of the update, because the conclusion cannot be not to do it. Indeed, imputing a zero value, as is now, is also an imputation. Okay, and so there's progress. There's progress there, and some of these questions. All of these specific issues need to be addressed on a case-by-case basis, I think, and with good guidance. I mean, one of the features of the current updating process was also that, unlike earlier rounds of updates, there was practical testing was already built into the discussion about the update. So the 2008 SNA, so the concepts were completed, and then the testing started. Now, this time around, the testing started while the concepts were discussed, and that delivered a lot of useful feedback for the update update itself. Then there was another group that says, well, there's too little in this update. Okay, you're refining something that doesn't reflect what's going on out there. You don't bring in the relevant things. And I mean, there's important voices like Diane Coyle in the UK who says the SNA update fails on its own ambition to show economic activity. Okay? And these are important discussions, and it's not even about bringing in well-being or something. It's about monitoring macroeconomic activity, she says, because we don't take account enough of intangibles, we don't take account of the fact that there's a blurring between household production and market production associated with the digital transformation. This gets lost, the free goods, and what is happening with this. So there's the important voices that come from the other side and say there's not enough that we've been doing. So of course I don't agree with that, because I think it's. Things have actually been done in a way that what we will see is still useful signals in terms of macroeconomic activity. There's also something that was mentioned actually in the discussion here, which I would label as the political economy of statistics. I mean, this update of an SNA means you have to bring all countries to a consensus to agree on this. And that is terribly difficult at the UN level to actually get agreement on this. Because again, you don't want to do too much. That leaves, the global south needs to be brought in. But you also don't want to be sort of arrogant in the sense of saying, well, the OECD countries, we do more than the global south can do, sort of a patronizing attitude. There's a lot of discussion in this political economy of update that you need to get the balance right. And so at the end, many things are compromised, but I think actually, it was not such a bad compromise that came out of that. The political economy concerns also the users. And I mean, this is something that has come through very clearly. You don't want to change things too radically, because then you lose them. And I mean, that's the worst thing if no one is interested in your statistics anymore. But you also want to keep things interesting enough so that they think this is a useful tool. So looking ahead, I think I fully agree with André that we've finished this update, and this is actually the right moment to start thinking about how to approach the next update. And probably, maybe it's not in 15 years, but we need to rethink the model, how this is done, and that should be done now and not in 15 years. In 15 years' time. The second point going forward is this whole issue about coordination. That is what we're doing here, what is going to happen tomorrow, and more generally. I think it's not only about coordination, it's also about cooperation in certain areas. Again, certain problems need to be resolved jointly and can be resolved jointly, and in a very practical way. One can think about jointly getting new data sources and use things together, or having the teams work to each other. So this is that is a real a practical question, how to take this forward. We heard about the need to maybe identify key clients or priorities, because one cannot be everything to everybody, and but that is a complicated discussion, and I think you would get very different answers if you ask different countries. Third point is, personally, I think in implementing the new SNA, a lot of pragmatism is required, and it is also the case that different parts of the changes will affect different countries very differently. And so, as David says, I mean, for Australia, this issue of getting the depletion measure is vital. Well, probably less important for Austria, okay? And so, I wouldn't recommend my statistical office to put massive resources into measuring the iron ore that is somewhere to be found in Salzburg, the salt in Salzburg. Yes. So I think you need a bit of pragmatism there as well, and find out the things that are most important for each of the countries. Because even if you get it wrong and it's not important, that's not such a big deal. Communication, I think that was mentioned a number of times, and making the case with policymakers that this is important. Generally, my experience is also that it's not so hard to convey this, or there seems to be a readiness to accept that this is an important way forward. And of course, help from academia. We've had a number of feedbacks here, and ESCoE is the right place to to deliver on this. Yeah. And I'll stop here.
Okay, thank you, Paul. And let's please join me in thanking all of our speakers.